You receive 10 pieces of feedback. 9 of them are good. 1 of them is critical. You spend the rest of the day thinking about the one. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness or insecurity or evidence that you need to work on yourself. This is one of the most deeply wired tendencies in the human brain, a tendency so fundamental that psychologists have given it a name, studied it across cultures, confirmed it in children as young as 3 months old, and traced its origins to the same evolutionary pressures that shaped almost everything else about how your mind works. It is called negativity bias. And understanding it may be one of the most genuinely useful things you can learn about your own mind. The foundational research here comes from psychologists Roy Baumeister and Mark Leary, whose landmark 2001 paper established what is now one of the most cited findings in social psychology: bad is stronger than good. Not slightly stronger. Substantially, reliably, consistently stronger across almost every domain of human experience. Bad events produce stronger, faster, and more durable responses than equivalent good events. Bad information is processed more thoroughly than good information. Bad impressions are formed faster and are harder to revise than good ones. A single bad experience can outweigh many good ones, and the negative emotional residue of a bad event lingers far longer than the positive glow of a comparable good one. To put numbers on it, research suggests that it takes approximately 5 positive interactions to counteract the emotional impact of a single negative one. Some studies put the ratio even higher in contexts involving criticism, conflict, or perceived threat. The mathematics of your emotional life are not neutral. The negative has a multiplier that the positive simply does not. But why? Why would a brain that needs to function in the world process bad news with more urgency and more depth than good news? The answer, as with so many features of the human mind, begins millions of years before you were born. Your ancestors lived in an environment where threats were not hypothetical. They were immediate, physical, and frequently fatal. A predator in the grass. A rival group on the horizon. A food source that turned out to be poisonous. In each of these cases, the cost of failing to notice the threat was catastrophic and irreversible. But the cost of missing a positive opportunity, failing to spot the ripe berries on the far hillside, was merely unfortunate. You could try again tomorrow. This asymmetry of consequences shaped the brain's threat detection system over millions of years of selection pressure. The organisms that survived were the ones who noticed danger fast, processed it thoroughly, remembered it vividly, and remained on heightened alert even after the immediate threat had passed. The organisms that greeted every experience with equal emotional weight were not selected for. They became something else's lunch. This is why your brain has what neuroscientists call a negativity bias at the neural level, not just a behavioral tendency but a structural feature. Negative stimuli activate the amygdala more rapidly and intensely than positive stimuli. Negative events trigger the release of stress hormones that encode memory more deeply. This is why traumatic memories are so vivid and why a single humiliating experience can be recalled in sharp detail decades later, while pleasant days blur together. Your brain is literally built to hold on to bad more tightly than good, because holding on to bad was what kept your ancestors alive. Psychologist Rick Hanson, who has written extensively on this topic, describes the human brain as being like velcro for negative experiences and teflon for positive ones. Bad sticks. Good slides off. This is not a metaphor, it reflects measurable differences in how long different types of experience are held in working memory, how deeply they are encoded in long-term memory, and how much attentional weight they receive during processing. The bias shows up everywhere once you know to look for it. In relationships, research by psychologist John Gottman found that couples in healthy long-term relationships maintain roughly a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. Below that ratio, the negative begins to outweigh the positive and the relationship deteriorates. The single criticism, the single dismissal, the single moment of contempt, these do not cancel out 5 compliments. They contaminate the entire emotional ledger in a way that 5 compliments simply cannot. In the workplace, negative feedback from a manager has a measurably greater impact on employee motivation and engagement than equivalent positive feedback. One study found that negative events at work are approximately 3 times more powerful in affecting well-being than positive events of comparable significance. The good quarter does not feel 3 times as good as the bad quarter feels bad. The accounting is asymmetric in a way that feels unfair because it is, by any rational standard, unfair. In politics and media, research consistently shows that negative news attracts more attention, is shared more widely, and is remembered longer than positive news of comparable significance. This is why news cycles skew negative, not because the world is getting worse, but because audiences respond more viscerally to threat than to opportunity, and media learns this quickly. Negativity bias is, in this sense, partly responsible for shaping the information environment you live in. In your self-perception, negative self-evaluations are stickier than positive ones. The one thing someone said that undermined your confidence lodges itself more deeply than the many things that affirmed it. You remember the failed presentation more clearly than the successful ones. You replay the awkward conversation more often than the ones that went well. Your internal narrative is written with a heavier pen for the bad chapters. And yet, and this is crucial, knowing about the bias does not eliminate it. You cannot simply decide to process negative and positive events equally, any more than you can decide to stop feeling hungry. The bias runs deeper than conscious intention. What you can do is become aware of the asymmetry, and build deliberate practices that counteract it. Neuroplasticity research suggests that the brain is not fixed in its weighting of negative and positive experience. Rick Hanson's work on what he calls hardwiring happiness, taking positive experiences and deliberately holding them in awareness for 15 to 30 seconds before moving on, suggests that sustained attention to positive experience can, over time, begin to shift the balance. Not by eliminating the bias, but by building up the positive side of the ledger more intentionally than the brain would do on autopilot. Psychologist Barbara Fredrickson's broaden-and-build theory proposes that positive emotions, when cultivated, expand the range of thoughts and actions available to a person, building psychological resources, resilience, and cognitive flexibility over time. The positive emotions do not cancel the negative. They build a wider container within which the negative can be held without being overwhelming. None of this means pretending the bad is not there. It means understanding that your brain has a thumb on the scale, and that the scale is not measuring what you think it is measuring. When you spend the rest of the day on the one critical piece of feedback, your brain is not giving you an accurate read of reality. It is running a survival program that was calibrated for a world of immediate physical threats, and applying it to a world of performance reviews and text messages and social media comments. The negative things that happen to you are real. The way your brain amplifies them beyond their actual proportion is also real. And so is the possibility of slowly, deliberately, imperfectly, learning to notice when the amplification is happening, and choosing, in that moment, not to give the bad its full evolutionary discount. You will not always succeed. The bias is old and it is deep. But the awareness is new. And it is yours.